समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Over 65% of India's population is below the age of 35 years old. And yet, how many of us really understand what makes them tick? Well, now a new book, Young, Wired and Not Woke, a book I highly recommend. I went through it in one easy reading. A new book brings alive this question and asks several other provocative questions. The book says that it might give us a glimpse into how the youth of India are redefining success, love, and self. Written by author and the founder of youth organization IIMUN Rishabh Shah. We'll be speaking to him in just a moment. I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo Story. What is Gen Z all about? This is one of those intergenerational debates that goes on and on. You hear people my age sometimes going, oof, these Gen Zers. You hear Gen Zers cribbing about Gen Alpha. Then there's the Gen Xers, the Boomers. All in all, it looks like many generations simply don't understand the other generation. Now, an interesting and intriguing, and I would say provocative new book tries to raise many questions about what defines India's youth. Is the youth today lost? How do they look at issues of love, sex, consent? How do they look at politics, religion, identity? And then, of course, this is a generation that has grown up in the age of influencers. The book raises a number of, according to me, both irreverent and important questions about how influencers or so-called influencers are actually impacting our minds. There's a lot to talk about, so let me introduce my friend Rishabh Shah, the author of this book. And I have to say, Rishabh, congratulations. I really enjoyed this book. And I want to actually start with something that not a lot of young people always talk about: politics, right? And in fact, your book opens with the fact that you know so many people who basically say, oh, I'm not into politics. And then you describe three categories of people that you often encounter. And I'm actually just going to read this bit out because I thought it was a very telling moment, a very telling capture of our time. You write, while some of us pretend to be disinterested and say things like, yeah, one vote doesn't matter, let's go out, it's a long weekend, there's another species at the other end of the spectrum, the hyper-political creatures. You've met one of these characters, we all have, and you say, you know you have. And after I read this, I was laughing out loud because I think we all have. So category one, Modi is the best thing since independence, says a friend who thinks India started in 2014 and ends at Man Ki Baat. Then the second category, everything is wrong with the world and it all started in 2014. This is that friend who believes Modi personally melted the ice caps and purposely did not create jobs. And finally, of course, you're right that there is the ultra woke intellectual activist who throws around words like fascism, genocide, and late stage capitalism with the same ease your aunt uses beta. Now, this is a hilarious passage, but it's also a very true passage. So let's start here. When young people say we're not interested in politics, or when they're interested in politics, you get off to this kind of extremism, the inability to actually make a rational argument. What does it do to our public discourse?
Firstly, I want to say thank you for having me. It means a lot. I've grown up watching you. So to be in conversation with you is a very big thing for me. So
thank you.
Really appreciate you giving me the platform to speak about this.
Thank you.
In regards to politics, I think it's an issue which is very important. Unfortunately, like I've outlined in the book, there are three types of creatures that one meets, and you've read out the passage. To answer your question, you said, why should young people be interested in politics? Did I get that correct? Or
No, you said you either meet people who say we're not interested in politics, the quote unquote apolitical types, or the hyper political types who only approach issues from this sort of extreme left right. And you go on in the chapter actually say there's nothing right in the left and nothing left in the right. Right.
Correct.
So let's hear more.
So in regards to that, the issue is that most of the people, most of Gen Z, is sometimes not as interested in politics. Of course, in comparison to my generation of millennials, the idea is that they are much more interested, much more woke in that sense. They are aware about political and social issues. But when you talk to them, and I don't blame them, majority of young people say that politicians are corrupt. And if you just look at our parliament, 46% of parliament has some sort of criminal case against them. 27 are convicted criminals. Now, when you go to a bank, you will not get a loan, but you can get a chair in parliament, as I've written in the chapter on politics.
Yes.
So the idea that when you have these kind of people governing the nation at different levels across party lines, then automatically young people are not going to be interested. Plus, when you use influencers in order to convince them saying go out and vote, the influencer themselves don't know anything about politics. In fact, influencers are now given tickets in political parties in order to contest, and they have very little interest or inclination in politics. And then you've got this kind of a neta. So therefore, I don't really blame a young person who's saying that, I'm not interested. And of course, there's the second type, which is the hypersensitive type, which gets easily offended, and they really believe in a particular ideology. And there's no problem in that. But sometimes it's not the ideology. Sometimes it's the algorithm. Because Barkha, of course, you know this better than anybody else, and everybody would be watching your show will understand it as well. That if you say 3 times, if you say Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump in front of your phone, you will get Donald Trump, or you'll get a picture of Mamdani standing next to Trump. And you're wondering what's happening. But the idea that will happen, and the algorithm will keep feeding you that same content if you keep liking it. So sometimes people who believe so strongly in the right and the left, they necessarily are victims of the algorithm when the politician in question has shifted from the right to the left. There is no moral compass. I think almost 50% of the MPs and MLAs in the BJP come from opposition parties. And this has happened even in the past. This is not the first time. So the idea is the politician is leading the ideology, but the public essentially is then clinging on to that ideology. So this is what I see rampantly in young people. Either they're completely not interested, saying, Rishabh, what's the point of doing this? Or second, they're so divided, and it's more divided than ever before. When I was growing up, it wasn't so divided under Prime Minister Vajpayee or Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, because most of us were not interested. Now, thanks to this government, of course, there are more people who are interested, but then you've got a more divisive electorate per se.
Well, I have to say, since you mentioned Mamdani standing next to Trump, when I looked at that photograph, I was like, well, I think this is how actually politics should be. You fight, you fight fiercely, and then after the elections are over, you meet in a civil, even funny manner for the sake of your electorate. But I just think we don't see enough of those moments. Now, you've mentioned influencers, and your book has some very scathing and also funny things to say about influencers. But before we get to that, you also talk about one of the reasons that young people are maybe not that engaged with politics, or some young people are not that engaged with politics, is because one is the perception of corruption, but the other is the perception of too many old people masquerading as young. I think you say, like, in India, 45-year-old is considered young, and to young people who are actually young, that's alienating. And B, the dynasty factor. I think somewhere you write it's not a democracy, it's a dadocracy. So talk about that. Yeah.
So when in 97, the average age of the parliament was about 46. Today, the average age of the Lok Sabha is 56, and that of the Rajya Sabha is 63. You've got a demographic which is largely 28 or 29. Now, for a 28-year-old, when you have a 70-year-old making policy, when he does not understand Taylor Swift or what Riz essentially is, not that these are prerequisites to enter politics, but the idea essentially is that you're governing for an electorate which is completely different. And therefore, when you speak about youth policies, at that juncture, when youth are only not involved, and when young people are told, saying, even at the age of 45 or 50, which I've written, saying, I have great regard for Sachin Pilot, the little that I know of him. And I think people like that are not given their due across party lines. And therefore, then young people are definitely not going to be interested if you're going to wait till post-retirement in order to get to actually do something for your country, because they are excited. And world over, if you see the trends, whether it's Jacinda Ardern, whether it's Anna Marin, whether it's President Obama, whether it's Zoran Mamdani, you've got young people who are in politics. So Why shouldn't Bombay have, say, for example, BMC is round the corner? Why shouldn't Bombay have a young mayor this time? And why should we have the
It could
same?
be, why wouldn't someone like you run?
Well, I think thank you for that, and thank you. But I don't think I'm cut out for politics. And that there are some of us who are needed outside politics in order to try to give the two bits in terms of funny things and not so funny things to the people who are within the political system.
Now, one of the very perceptive things that you've just said, and you're right, is how perceptions today, ideologies today are shaped by the algorithm and not necessarily by lived experience or even research. And that is a big concern, a concern for me. When I see young people with very hardened positions this way or that way, it seems to me like a lot of Instagram derived knowledge, a lot of information today is derivative. In this context, you talk about influences, and you actually say, tongue firmly in cheek, who's going to really be influencing anybody if everybody's an influencer? So today, everybody's either a content creator or an influencer. A lot of young people say, what do? I'm a content creator, I'm an influencer, right? You're also very blunt in the book, in interviews. In particular, I would recommend to everybody your interview with Cyrus Brocha, hilarious, but also very sharp, about what you think of these influences. And you have again, tongue firmly in cheek, you say you don't always need there to be biceps in the beer, and you don't need all talents to go latent. You're obviously taking here a dig at and not a disguised dig at Ranveer Labadia. You later make some very startling revelations about Raj Shamani. So let's talk about influences, Rishabh.
No, firstly, thank you for the question, because I think it's the most important question in Gen Z and millennials, especially, and anybody who hopes to understand them. The thing is that in YouTube in 2022 came out with a survey which said that 750,000 people essentially were on the internet from India as content creators. Now, YouTube in 2025 has come out with a survey that 83% of Gen Z think that they are content creators and put out some form of content per se.
Yeah.
One point, they used to contribute $1 billion in terms of the economy in 2022. I'm sure it's only gone up. But the problem is that these platforms that we're creating this content on are essentially not Indian platforms. We call for an Atmanirbhar Bharat, but we all saw what happened with the alternative to TikTok that we tried to build per se. So one thing is that if we are getting a generation which is all going to become influencers, there's no problem in that. And there's no problem in even using these platforms. But these platforms and the data is not even ours. So tomorrow, if there's some sort of a TikTok scenario, then what does Young India do? Because instead of studying your CA and CFA, you're giving advice on finance. Watching Grey's Anatomy, you're starting giving MBBS advice. So the idea essentially, Barkha, is that if you've got a generation of influencers who are leaving academics, and I don't blame them. If a 16-year-old is told saying that a farmer's son in a small village is getting 2 lakh rupees after 100,000 followers, why would somebody want to study in academia? There are maximum number of college dropouts are happening today, and that is because of influencers. So the idea is that it's not something that is a proper economy. Of course, the government is trying to build that economy, but I don't see rules and regulations out there. I don't see that.
In fact, the point you make in your book is that the government, instead of regulating this space, and I'm curious to know why you think it needs regulation, you say the government joined the bandwagon in the 2024 election. A number of these influencers who had never actually reported on politics or looked at politics in any serious way were basically picked to do political interviews. So tell me why. Because it's very unusual to hear a young person saying any space on social media or social networks should be regulated. Tell me why you think it should be regulated, why you trust the government with that, and why you were disillusioned or irritated or amused, whatever your word is, when the government basically started going to many of these quote-unquote influencers for serious political interviews.
But the thing is, in terms of regulation, I'm a huge fan of podcasting and podcasters. I think it is the fourth pillar of democracy. It can become what media essentially was supposed to be. And I sincerely hope that, I used to hope that podcasting would give us something which would be very different from what we see today. But unfortunately, influencers are being used because they've got a large number of, they've got a big following. And therefore, what essentially happens is that government is using them, political parties are using them in order to further their narrative. Now, when you're talking to somebody who's politically and socially aware, there is no problem about it. But when you're talking to somebody who clearly is not interested, because there's no post before, there is no post after, it's just for that duration that the person suddenly starts talking about economic issues and political issues per se, then it's a script. And then what's happening, unfortunately, is you're utilizing that to further your propaganda across political lines, but you're not seeing that the person that you're giving that kind of space to, like today you're allowing me to speak to you. So in a way, you're offering a pedestal to a person in order to speak at a particular platform. When you're validating those kind of people, and I'm just coming to the question of, what is it that you have against these kind of people? I think they're just normal 30-year-olds. I think they're normal 35-year-olds. There's nothing wrong with them. But the problem is that when you sacrifice your morals and your values and you sell out for a particular price and then you peddle a particular narrative, then it becomes a problem. How many of these influencers have taken interviews of people of the same caliber across party lines? You've seen IIMUN, you've come to IIMUN. We've had the good fortune of having both you and Rajdeep Sardesai, and we've also had Anand Narasimhan per se. We've got Rahul Gandhi coming, we've got Mohan Bhagwat coming. But the idea is that these people are peddling a particular narrative. Then you've got a young India who's more polarized than ever. And most of these people, like you showed, Ranveer and Raj and all of these people, the thing is, because they've got so much of fame, and it's overnight fame and overnight success, and I wish them only luck and well, but the only thing is that then you've got some sort of moral responsibility. Plus, they've projected themselves as holier than thou. That's the problem.
You made a revelation which I was not aware of, that Raj Shamani, you gave him as, I don't know if it's an example or the only one of his kind, has a rate card for podcasts. And I was actually shocked to hear this.
Barkha, when I wrote to you saying, can I please talk about the book, there was no rate card that was told to me, but there was
certainly not.
But there was a rate card that all of them have. All of them have specific rates.
So you mean that to go onto their program, you have to pay money?
It's all paid. It's all paid. There's nothing that's real. There are many people.
And it's not released as a branded advertorial. Like, look, everybody takes advertisements. Everybody does some degree of branded content or paid partnerships, but you're supposed to disclose them. And that can't be all of your content. So you're basically saying that if you go ahead. You tell us the story.
No, correct. So it's basically a paid partnership. Usually, say, for example, if somebody is doing everything for you and paying you after that, then that is supposed to come under the banner of paid partnership. Unfortunately, none of these interviews are paid partnership. They're peddled as normal conversations. And therefore, the public who's watching this conversation automatically starts to believe in a particular ideology or particular belief. And what I'm trying to say is that, doing that through media, then that will destroy the fact that the credibility of media was the fourth pillar of democracy, because you would keep everybody in check. You would ask the tough questions. You would make sure that at least they're not soft interviews to the extent and the degree that it's sometimes crass. And what happens is that a young person who's 16 or 17, of course, as much as they're discerning and they can tell, there are very many who get vastly influenced. And most of these people who are these influencers, and that's the beef that I have with them in a Gen Z slang, is the fact that most of them try to be holier than thou. So it's suddenly giving you spiritual gyan, they're giving you relationship advice. And this is what I would like to tell people via your platform, is that most of these people's lives, if you actually put the camera on them, like it's happened, when the camera comes shining, not on India's Got Talent, but India's Got Legend, then you've got a very different personality. And there's no problem with that. You're just a normal 30-year-old, but then behave like a normal 30-year-old. Don't start giving gyan in the middle of your podcast per se. So that is something that I firmly believe. Like in journalism, you used to ask questions. I've grown up watching so many people who ask tough questions, and that's the way it should be.
But can I ask you again? You're basically saying that if you reach out to, let's say, Raj Shamani, he will say to you, or his producers will say to you, or somebody in his team will say to you, Rishabh, if you want to get onto the show, this is how much money you have to pay.
And Barkha, the sad thing I'll tell you is this: 6 years ago, in case of Raj, and I've said this to him as well, and before making this public, I even reached out to him personally. 6 years ago, when he was starting out, if you go to his page, one of the first interviews was mine. He came to me and he said, Rishabh, can I please take your interview? I said, listen, my reach is physical, it's not digital. And my job is to create leaders, not become one. Don't take it. But if you want to take it, please. So I gave him the interview. And then 6 years later, when we reached out to him saying, this is something that we would like to talk about. It's about Gen Z. It is about podcasters, influencers, etc. That's when the shock came. that the rate card came through. And then I did message him and I did say that, is it possible to do this? There was radio silence. And after that, the team again got back and said, we can give you a little bit of a discount. That's about it. So the idea is that, so if you're
I am
telling people-
just, I don't know what to say. I'm just so startled that I don't know what to say.
And I hope Vijay Mallya was charged 10 crore, is all I would say.
So you believe that very viral interview that Shamani took of Vijay Mallya, who is, of course, wanted by India for all manners of very grave financial improprieties and corruption. You believe that Shamani would have been given money to do that interview with Vijay Mallya. Is it a surmise, or is it something you...
No, I'm confident that this would be the case, because at the end of the day, why would you give a convicted felon, somebody who's wanted by everyone in the country, you're giving that person a voice and a platform? Tomorrow, it'll become such that you'll start giving Ajmal Kasab an interview and a chance saying that, please justify your actions and as to why you've done what you've done. Now, if we've come to that, I think, quite honestly, then we're moving far away from what podcasting was supposed to be, which is journalism. If it becomes just entertainment and it's a talk show that you're putting on Hotstar or Netflix, fair. But the only thing is that if it's supposed to be serious journalism, getting to know people, like what is happening in the West, and that's where, in some cases we must learn from the West, as much as I say that there needs to be an Indian lens to a lot of issues, then this is not the kind of journalism that is expected.
Very, very quickly, before we move on to another dimension of your book, to young people who follow these people, right? What would you say? What would you say to them?
I would say, don't take everything at face value. Please question, please see what these people are saying, see how they lead their lives. Try to understand that there is much beyond what the profile is showing you, and only then choose your role models. There are role models and real models. Barkha, I keep saying this. I grew up in the generation of Rahul Dravid, took forever in order to get 100 runs, but he was Mr. Dependable. He doesn't have a social media account. He's not flamboyant. He's not the most natural speaker per se. But Rahul Dravid lives his life just like that. It's disciplined, it's simple, and that's the kind of life that I grew up with, of a Rahul Dravid or a Narayan Murthy or a Azim Premji or a Deepak Parekh. These are the kind of people. But today you've got sharks in tanks, you've not got whales in oceans. Today you've got influencers, you've got real models and not role models. So all I would tell young people is choose role models, because India needs whales in oceans. We don't need sharks in tanks, and we need people who can win us test matches. Otherwise we'll keep losing the ones.
Yeah. Or you have to leave it to the women, to win. Right? But
women are doing far better than the men. Women are doing far better.
Exactly. Look, the book is, and I mean this as a compliment, the book is really easy to read. It's really accessible. It's a breeze to read, and it's funny in parts. And you've got some great one-lines, but it tackles some very serious subjects, right? And at the heart of it, I think the book is trying to get into how young people's minds are being shaped. But you also talk about religion. You also talk about the fact that in India, there are more temples, not just temples, there are more places of worship with 50 plus people than functioning schools with 50 plus kids learning. You talk about how something life-shifting, you don't tell us what happened to you when you were 25. And it took you on a journey where you started, looking at faith, looking at what religion meant to you, looking at what God meant to you. So let's talk about that in the end.
Right. So religion, one of the other topics in the book essentially is because we've not been told to question religion. I think when I grew up in a Jain family, yet my parents they follow Jainism. There are pujas at home, and there are Tirthankar Murtis as well. But the idea that I was told to recite the Namokar mantra, ये 2 बार कर लो and ये 2 बार करोगे तो बाद में आपको अच्छा होगा. That is what I was told. So every time I did that, I thought that I would get good marks in history and English and mathematics. Sometimes I wouldn't get the good marks in mathematics and come back and ask saying, I too did the Namokar mantra twice, but then why did I not get the marks? I think that was an innocent 9-year-old me. But when I kind of read more, I kind of realized that if the books that we're reading today were essentially meant to be read in the current way that they are, then why would there be so many dichotomies in what God had to say? And I keep mentioning this, saying that, I'm not taking the position that what Javed sir takes, wherein there is no, there is perhaps no God. But
Javed Akhtar is an atheist. And he calls him, and he says, "I'm a Muslim atheist," which is a very intriguing way to self-identify. But go ahead, yeah.
Correct. But what I'm trying to say is, I'm not questioning people's belief in God as much as I'm questioning the fact that performative religion should not be there. Because at the end of the day, I don't think God essentially wanted somebody to stand outside a mandir or a masjid in a queue, waiting in order to give donations to God, the Almighty, who's sitting out there. And I don't think he's actually calculating how much of donation you're making to him. So I think what's happened in today's day and age, there are more gurus and less guru gantals. This has become, there are more guru gantals and less gurus. This has become more where essentially you've got people who are peddling business in the name of religion. And if you see the biggest temples, whether the Tirupati temple, the Padmanabh Swami temple, all of these temples that are there, they have huge coffers. And I've mentioned this in the book and in many interviews, saying that, if the same attention was paid to education or to climate change, today we are smoking 25 cigarettes in Delhi, 12 in Bombay. So it's only getting worse. And the idea is, if that same kind of attention was paid to issues that are actually real issues, then the nation would actually become Viksit. I'm sure young people will make it Viksit irrespective of governments. And I do believe that both governments want to make it Viksit. But the real issues matter, not the issues such as religion. Every time you see a campaign, you see orange or you see green, and people start coming and voting on those lines. And personally, I don't think that's what's needed. We need to talk about these kind of issues more. Just one thing that I'll mention about religion quickly is that people take a lot of offense whenever you talk about religion. Like whenever you question God, and I've seen a few reels that I've put up, people are like, but you are a Hindu, how can you say this against Hindus, or if you've said this against Islam? But the thing is, if we don't question God, or if we don't question things around us, then we're going to just live in the algorithm or in what society's algorithm is. And like Mahatma Gandhi said, and like so many other people said, who some were believers and some were not. But I fundamentally believe that where there is faith, there is no place for truth. And where there is truth, there is no need for faith. So why don't we read experiments Experiments with Truth by Mahatma Gandhi and start with that, where he said, I used to believe in the fact that there was God, and then he landed up
as his own journey. Yes.
And his own journey. Yes, and his own journey. So why do we not study that then?
Well, the challenge would be first to get somebody to read Experiments with Truth, to read an actual physical book. I loved your book, and I'm not just saying this because, you're my friend. I really did love your book. There's so much in it. I don't want to give it all away in this conversation. You talk about political correctness, wokeness, the obsession with pronouns. You talk about love, crushes, sex. You talk about mental health. Are we in danger of trivializing it by using loose language around it? You talk about climate change. There's just so much in this book, and it's really, really accessible. Young, wired, and not woke: How the Youth of Today Are Redefining Success, Love, and Self. I urge all of you to pick up a copy. We'll put a link in the description below so you can pre-order a copy for yourself. Rishabh, I just want to say to you before we say thank you, you've built this massively successful youth organization. You're writing books. You're doing so much. But I have some advice for you, which I hope you don't dismiss as some auntie advice. I think you're hilarious. And I do think you should explore satire and stand-up comedy. I really think you should.
Well, thank you. I'll take that as a compliment, and that is
absolutely. It is a compliment.
That's what I hope to do when they kick me out and tell me, saying, Rishabh, you're not young anymore. IIMUN's run by 16 to 22-year-olds, and when they tell me you don't look 22 anymore, Rishabh, then perhaps I'll do stand-up comedy without too much profanity. But the last thing that I'll say is this, Barkha, genuinely, not because we're doing this conversation, I really look up to the kind of journalism that you've done over the years, and therefore to be in conversation is an absolute pleasure. About the book, as Shashi Tharoor mentioned it, and somebody again I greatly revere and respect, he said it's against performative wokeism. So a lot of people basically came up and said that, Rishabh, why is this book called Young, Wired, and Not Woke? We thought you were woke. So I said, it's against performative wokeism. So please read and find out a little more about what I mean by performative wokeism and what this generation is essentially thinking. It also gives the last thing, it also gives a lot of Indian lens or an Indian context to universal problems like mental health and climate change, etc. There are mentions of the Rig Veda, the Atharva Veda, the English translations. My Sanskrit is weak, but the English translations of these books. So I hope you go and pick up a copy. And thank you, Barkha, for providing this platform. Really appreciate it. I'm very grateful.
You're more than welcome. And in fact, one line I do remember where you say the gender fluidity was, spoken of first in the Mahabharata before there was Paris Fashion.
Before the Paris Pride Parade.
The Paris Pride Parade. Yes, absolutely. So many sort of sparkling one-liners there with some very deep thoughts behind them. I love Shashi's line against performative wokeism. That's exactly what it is. If I had to describe your book in one line, it's this. It's encouraging people, young, old, middle-aged, whatever, is encouraging everybody to be free thinkers. Think for yourself. Think rooted in culture and roots, yes, but above all, in logic, in information, in facts. Thank you, Rishabh. I congratulate you on this book, and I hope a lot of people will read it. Thank you. Take care. God bless. I said God bless. I think that is allowed, even as we ask questions of our gods and our faiths. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barkha.
Thank you. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Voter Story and support independent, robust journalism.